Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another English lesson. Today we'll be focusing on the address from your snapshot reader. Now, this chapter is very short, but it is very significant and it deals with some very important themes. Now, I am not a fan of the way this is presented in your textbook. They've just said like the war and this and that, but at the core of the story deals with some very difficult topics. Now, before you begin reading this, look up the Holocaust on the internet. Look up what the Holocaust means. Look up the Second World War. Look at what happened to like the Jewish people in Europe at that time. Because that will give you a better idea of what this chapter is supposed to be dealing with. Like your textbook doesn't have any of this background, and it's really hard to understand this story without that reference in mind. So make sure you read up about what the Holocaust involved, what the Holocaust was, how were Jewish people persecuted during the tenure of Adolf Hitler, what actually happened. Because if you don't know about the Holocaust, if you have no idea about it, like you should know about it because it is one of the most significant events of like 20th century. 1/3 of the Jewish population of Europe was eliminated systematically by Adolf Hitler and his allies. Like 1/3 of the entire Jewish population of Europe was eliminated. They didn't die because of natural cause, they didn't die because something happened to them. They were systematically and brutally eliminated. And that's what the story is dealing with. The story is about a Holocaust survivor going back and trying to reclaim pieces from her life. That's what makes this so significant. That's why this is supposed to be included in your reader. Now, the way the NCERT has presented this story to you in your books has nothing. Like, they haven't given you any context. They're just talking about a war. What does war mean? It's not about a war. So read up about the Holocaust, read up about the Second World War, get an idea of what we're talking about, get an idea of what this story is supposed to be about, and then move on with the rest of the video where I'll explain the themes and the summary, and I'll give you, like as always, I'll give you a monologue about what the chapter is. And then like whatever the resources I think that you should have, whatever the resources I think you will help you understand, I'll also put them in the video. So make sure before you read this chapter, read up about the Second World War and the Holocaust and what happened to the Jewish people in Europe. Alright, so let's get into the video. Before this video starts, one more thing I would like to say to all of you. This is a very disturbing chapter for me personally because reading about the Holocaust, researching about it takes an emotional toll on you. Like it's not something that's very fun to read about. It's not something that you should be taking lightheartedly. It's not something that should be read lightheartedly. Like the amount of suffering that was inflicted upon those people is mind-boggling. Like it just you can't even imagine what happened, and like it draws parallel to what's happening in our world right now. It draws parallels to what's happening in Israel. It's what's happening in Palestine, what's happening around us at the moment as well. Like why are we electing charismatic leaders who are preaching this doctrine of hate? Didn't we learn from what happened? Like, so make sure you pay attention to all of this before you begin reading this chapter. All right, so let's just get into the video. So by now, I hope most of you have read about the Holocaust. Most of you have at least gone through like the basics of what like the Second World War entailed and what the Holocaust actually was. If you haven't, pause the video and go through it right now because like I said, it's gonna help you understand this chapter a lot better. Sorry, I had to adjust my camera a little bit. That's why it moved. But like I said, the way this chapter is presented in your textbook is very weird. I mean, they've sanitized it so much. I mean, there's no mention of the Holocaust, there's no mention of the Second World War, there's no mention of like this author was a Jewish lady from Netherlands who lost her job, her family was sent to a concentration camp, she lost her entire family, her brothers, her sister, her mother, father, all of them died, and the only reason she escaped was she ran out of the back door. She had to dye her hair, she had to get a false ID, and that's how she survived the war. And none of this is given to you in the chapter. Like I don't understand how this, like how are you supposed to read this story? How are you supposed to understand what's going on? Am I just supposed to teach this to you like a piece of text? Because that's not what this is. Like I said, the Holocaust was an incredibly painful thing. For like 6 million people lost their lives. 1/3 of the entire Jewish population of this world was wiped out systematically. 2/3 of European Jews were wiped out. And not just European Jews, like Slavs, Romani, people who were mentally disabled were killed, homosexuals were killed. Anybody who dissented from the Nazi party was killed. I mean, they had like mountains of bodies, like so this is what it was supposed to be like. This is what you're supposed to be reading about. This is the background of the story. This is why the story is so important. That's why this is so emotionally harrowing. Look up all the words like that you don't understand that I'm using, look them up in the dictionary and make notes of them so we can talk to each other about it, all right? So this is the background of the story. It is set against the backdrop of a Holocaust survivor, somebody who survived the Holocaust. The most clear example of this is in like this line in your chapter. This is just page number 10. Have you come back, said the woman. I thought that no one had come back, only me. Do you realize what that means? It means everybody who was taken to like a deportation camp, everybody who was arrested by the Nazis never came back. And that's true. Like they took entire families, entire regions were emptied out. There was no people left. And that's the reason, like this is what happened in the story as well. Like now this author's family was from Amsterdam, so Netherlands, when they got occupied by Germany. What usually happens, like if you read about the Holocaust, if you read about what the Nazis did, whenever they took over a place, like they put forth their anti-Jewish laws as well. So Jewish people weren't allowed to own businesses, they weren't allowed to own property, they weren't allowed to do basically anything under Nazi society. They weren't even considered human. They were considered Untermensch, like in German, which means a lesser race. They had the idea of the superiority of the Aryan race, which was like blonde hair, blue-eyed Germans and this and that. And that's a very pseudo-scientific argument. Like it had no scientific value. Like none of this makes sense. It was just like hate. It was just fueled by hate and like anger and like the right time and the right place. Basically, Hitler was a match and Germany was a powder keg at that time. And like the match hit the powder keg and there was an explosion and like it just changed the world completely. Why I am saying this is important to you is because we are going through a period in our time right now where we are dealing with same situations. The reason why Donald Trump got elected in America was because of the same rhetoric, was because of the same rhetoric that he was preaching. It was the same rhetoric that Adolf Hitler was preaching, where like there's a race war happening, like where somebody is below you, where you think that you, just by the virtue of your skin color, just by the virtue of what race you are, just by the virtue of what genes you have, you're somehow better than somebody else. Which is not true. We are all humans, we are all the same. Like if you cut me, I'll bleed just the same as you. If you cut somebody else, they'll bleed just the same as me. There is literally nothing that separates us. We are all the same. That's what we are dealing with right now. We're dealing with a phase in our history, in our modern history. Like, for example, like the Second World War started like in 1919, right? I mean, it ended in 1919, I think. I'm not really sure. Let me just look this up and I'll like confirm. If you feel like I'm wrong about anything in any of these videos and you feel like there's something that I'm misrepresenting, if there's a fact that you think that I'm mistaken about, please let me know in the comments and I'll make sure that I read upon it and correct myself. I am not above correcting myself. I'm not saying that I'm God and I'm infallible and whatever I'm saying is right. I'm just trying to explain to you with my limited experience, with my limited study of the Holocaust. Like I said, the Holocaust isn't an easy thing to study. Just to prepare for this chapter, just to prepare for this lesson, I was reading about the Holocaust like for the past 2 days and it has left me like emotionally drained. Like the pictures that I've had to see, the things that I've had to read are not pleasant at all. And so just be careful whenever you're reading something about like the Holocaust, whenever you're delving into that history, just make sure that you're in a good mental state, make sure that your emotional state is fine. Otherwise, these things will haunt you at night. I mean, I still have nightmares. Like I just somehow ended up looking at pictures of like the gas chambers and the ghettos and everything else and like the mass graves, and that crap is still stuck inside my head right now. Which is why I'm so mad at the way this chapter is presented to you in the NCRT books, because like they've just turned it into like 3 pages, 4 pages of this woman's pain. That's it, like this address, like this story. Like for example, like if you look at the textbook question and the answer, like this is so stupid, like the way they presented it to. I mean, I have no idea why they would do it. The story is divided into pre-war and post-war times. What hardships do you think the girl underwent during these times? Like, dude, this is not about pre-war and post-war. This is about the Holocaust and a survivor of the Holocaust trying to reclaim her life. This is completely wrong. This question isn't even about the chapter. Like, I don't understand like how they came to this conclusion or why they thought like children shouldn't be taught about the Holocaust, because like this is an important part of human history. This is an important event in human history. Like it is like one of the largest systematic eradications of a people in modern times. Like there have been genocides, there have been mass pogroms against other races if you read up about it. Like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Joseph Stalin and the gulags and everything else, Mao's like Great Leap Forward, which led to the death of like 40-50 million Chinese people. So there have been like systematic eliminations throughout history. Like whenever there has been a dictator, whenever there has been somebody who has been in power and disagrees with another group of people, the most important thing for them to do is consolidate their power. And how do they do it? By eliminating all opposition. So this has gone on throughout history. But like what Hitler did and what his allies did and what other people did, it'll send shivers down your spine. Like, not fun reading, it's not fun knowing about it, but we have to we can't avoid uncomfortable truths. And this is an uncomfortable truth that the Holocaust actually happened. It was people like us, people like you, people like me who did it to each other. We did it to each other. We did these things as human beings to one another. Let's focus on the story, all right? Now, the story is about this lady who goes back to reclaim her old things from this woman who came to her mother's house. Now, like I said, if you read about the Holocaust, that's why this will explain the story a lot better to you, like what happened. So she says like this mother's acquaintance suddenly popped up out of nowhere and started taking things from their house to keep them safe. Now, why would she keep them safe? Why would she start taking things away from her house? And why would her mother let them take away? Because before they actually went on like this whole killing spree, that before they actually started deporting the Jewish people into concentration camps, they started by taking over their businesses, by getting rid of by removing them from offices and jobs and everything else. There's something called Kristallnacht, which you should read about. I'll put the link to it in the video. This is a German word, Kristallnacht. It starts with a K, Kristallnacht. That's how it's spelled, Kristallnacht. That's how you pronounce it. Like it's German, so it's pronounced Nacht. Basically, Kristallnacht was like a night where there was an assassination done by a 17-year-old Polish Jew of a German chancellor, and he shot him. And like Germany, like I said at that time, was a powder keg. Like it was basically gunpowder waiting for a spark. And that sparked everything, and like so many Jewish businesses was lost, so many lives were lost, and that was like the beginning of the Holocaust. That's where like the balance tipped in the favor of the Holocaust. Now, Jewish people have always been historically persecuted, like they've had to deal with a lot of hardships in their lives. So when this thing started happening, they realized, oh, maybe if we just stayed calm, if we don't resist, maybe this thing won't escalate. That's where they were wrong. That's where they believed too much in the goodness of human beings. That's where they believed too much in the humanity of their oppressors. Because the Nazis didn't stop there. Like they took over their businesses, they took over their jobs. They started like making them wear yellow patches on their breastplate, which was called Juden. They would write Juden on the businesses, and they would have to wear a yellow Star of David, which denoted that you were a Jewish person. Then they started deporting them into ghettos. Once they started deporting them into ghettos and everything else, like Hitler, when the war effort finally began, when Nazi Germany like took over Poland first, and then they took over France, and they started taking over Hungary, Romania, and all these places. That's when like the Hitler's final solution, that's what he called it, the final solution to the Jewish problem, was implemented when Jewish people were packed into like concentration camps, and there was like horrible things being done to them. I mean, if I started going into them now, even now talking to you people about it is just giving me like creeps, like it's giving me like goosebumps talking to you about it, because like the images keep going through my head. If you haven't seen these movies about it, like Schindler's List is a very good movie that everybody I think should watch once in their lives. Like if you haven't seen Schindler's List even once in your life, you should watch it, because that will explain to you like what the graveness of the situation is, what the Holocaust actually was. So make sure that you watch Schindler's List. There's another American series called Band of Brothers, and there's an episode where the American soldiers finally liberate like the concentration camps, and you should watch that scene. I'll put a link to it. I'll either put a link to it or I'll put it into the end of the video. The problem with like putting footage into the video is YouTube copyrights a lot of things, so I can't really put forth like a lot of documentary footage into this video, which is why I keep telling you guys to watch this, or keep telling you guys to look up things up, because like I don't want to get copyright striked and get this whole channel shut down. So make sure like wherever I'm telling you, you watch it. So just look this thing up, look these things up. And there's books also which I'll be recommending that you should read if you want to read a little bit more. Like I said, like all of my students should be aware of this, like because this is a very important part. And I get it, like not a lot of us have spoken about it. Like I don't know if your teachers, history teachers, or anybody has taught you about the Holocaust till now. Because like I said, even our teachers didn't teach us about anything. Like even they had no idea how to teach this to us. Like they said, like yeah, the Holocaust happened and this happened and everything. But like the way it happened, like the depths of depravity that man went to, like Adolf Hitler and all the people surrounding him, like what they did to those poor people. I mean, it's just, I have no words to describe it. Like I literally have no words to say anything about it. Because like for me, like looking at looking at it from the outside, looking at it from 2021 and looking back at it, it just seems insanity. Like, how would you let other people do it? And that's what happened here in the story as well. Like this lady who was supposedly her mother's friend is taking stuff from their houses just to say, oh, I'll keep it safe for you, I'll keep it safe for you. Now everybody knows something is going to happen, right? Like there, right there where you see like when she's taking stuff from her house and her mother says like she's looking at it to keep it safe, and like, oh, she might get into trouble like leaving with a Jewish house with a suitcase. So there is an implication that something wrong is happening. It's not explicitly stated, but there is an implication that something wrong is going to happen, that something wrong is happening to these people. That's why I feel like this was like a background that was missing from this chapter, which should have been provided to you by the NCRT, what this background was. And the background was like the people around them, like Nazi Germany gave rewards to people to rat out their Jewish neighbors, and some people did. Many people protected their neighbors. Many people lost their lives protecting their Jewish neighbors and friends, and because they went against like Nazi Germany, they went against the ideals. They were like, no, these are our friends. We have spent our entire lives with these people. How can you just suddenly say that these are below us? These are like a different race. This is like a stupider race than us. This is like an inferior race than us. Pardon my use of the word stupid. That should not have been put there, but like inferior race than us. How can you say that? And like they were arrested too. They were killed too. If you were called a Jewish sympathizer, you were sent to the concentration camps. You might even be shot in the streets. So that's what happened. Like even companies like BMW, Mercedes, and all these German companies, they were using Jewish slaves from the concentration camps to run their company, to run their factories. All the assets of Jewish people were sold by the banks to German people. Like they took everything from them. But like people, when they were sent to concentration camps, would bring their household things with them because they thought they were going to be relocated. And before they were sent to the gas chamber, all their belongings, everything else was collected in a pile outside and then sold back to the Germans. Do you realize that? Their own neighbors and everything else. Informants in Poland, like this whole hate propaganda that the Nazi Germany spread, like people were ratting out their neighbors for like for money. People were ratting out their neighbors just to get some food. People were not ratting out their neighbors just for anything, like any little thing. If you were suspected of being a Jew in Nazi Germany, like you had to get out of there. If you haven't read Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, please do. And I'll try to find a non-sanitized version of it because like her father edited that book heavily before he released it. And it's a story of a young Jewish girl in hiding in France and like her thoughts and her dreams. And like if you read the unedited, unabridged version of that, you realize that she's not that different from you. She was 15 years old. She had crushes too. She liked people too. She liked listening to music. She liked reading books. And she was just the same as you. She had the thoughts that you had, like, what is going to happen with my life? What am I going to do? Am I going to grow up? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And it was all taken away from her. She was murdered by the Nazis as well. And how many kids were murdered? You have like literally, we cannot even imagine like the amount of suffering inflicted upon these people. So this is what this story deals with. Now this author goes back to this lady's house and like the lady pretends that she doesn't know her. Of course she would pretend she doesn't know her because like she thought all the Jewish people were killed. When this lady shows up, this lady is a reminder of what that lady did wrong, of her guilt, because she stole stuff from these people. Like she wasn't keeping it safe. No, she was stealing stuff from them. She might have told her mother that you can take all this stuff back from me, but she had no intention of giving it back. She knew like if somebody got deported, there was no way they were coming back. And that's what she did. That's what she did to these people. I mean, not just she, everybody around them was doing the same thing. Anytime a Jewish family was sent to the concentration camp, their neighbors and the people around them would descend upon their house, steal everything, take everything away from them. And that was it. Like so many Jewish people lost their entire belongings. They lost their businesses. They lost their houses. They lost their ancestral lands. They were driven out from places they've lived for in hundreds of years. Like their ancestors were born there. Their great-great-grandfathers were born there. And suddenly they were sent into concentration camps. And I mean, the majority of them didn't come back. Like the survivors were lucky, the people who survived. And that's why this lady, when she comes back and all these things that she wanted to like just look at one more time, that's why she has such an emotional, visceral reaction to her. I mean, if my parents passed away suddenly, like, and not even passed away, like if I was there, if I was in this lady's place and I just survived like the Holocaust, the war had just been over and I wanted to go back and find my mother's stuff, would I really want to go back and get all of that stuff? All the memories that were attached to it, that the people those memories belong to aren't even alive anymore. Those people whose memories are attached to those things were murdered brutally. Would I really want those things in my life? Would I really want those things back in my life? I don't think I would. And this is the conclusion that this lady reaches as well. Like our author, the narrator, this is what she reaches, the conclusion that she reaches as well. That I don't want these things in my life. She meets like this lady's daughter. She goes back to her house and everything else, and she remembers like where the tablecloth was burnt. She remembers where every spoon looks like. She remembers what every plate looks like. But all of these memories are just bringing her pain. They're not bringing her comfort. They're not bringing her closure, because there is no closure to be had. Because her mother didn't pass away. Her mother, her father, her family was taken away from her by force. Not by nature, not by anything else, not by through natural causes or not through a natural disaster, but by human greed, by human lust for power, by human belief in this idea that like somebody else can be superior to somebody else. And this lady who's stolen all of mother's stuff, like she just denies her existence. And that's what I mean. Like that's what I mean by like subhumanizing a people. Like even the people around them didn't consider the Jews to be humans at that time. They considered them an inferior race of people. They didn't even consider them human, and that's why they dehumanized them to such an extent that they murdered 6 million of them between 1938 to 1945. So that's what this story is about. This story is about a Holocaust survivor trying to find closure in a world that has given her nothing but pain, and trying to move on with her life. Like she says in the last line of this chapter, which is very, very important. I resolved to forget the address. Of all the things I had to forget, that would be the easiest. Yep, it's true. It's just an address, like 46 Marconi Street, that's the address, right? It's very easy to forget. It's not easy to forget that your entire family was murdered by a crazed psychopath, and the people around them and your friends, like your family's friends and everything else, they stole everything from you. And now you're just alone in this world where you had to like change your name, dye your hair. Can you imagine the survivor's guilt she might be feeling? Like she ran out of the back door while her family was arrested and sent to a concentration camp, and she ran to save her life. There's something called survivor's guilt, where you survive a situation where everybody around you is dying and you feel like maybe you shouldn't have survived, maybe you're a bad person because you survived. That's what the story deals with. The story is not about pre-war and post-war time. The address is a story of a human predicament that follows war. This is not anything. Like these are all questions that I'm reading from your book, and this is nothing to do with the story. The story is about a Holocaust survivor and the things that she has to deal with, trying to get her life back, trying to move on from like the horrors that she's seen, the horrors that she has faced. Do you realize that like for a brief period of time, like being Jewish was a crime? Like she feared for her life. If anybody found out that she was Jewish, chances are she might have been killed, she might have been shot, chances are she might have been sent to a concentration camp or jail. And now this world is suddenly like over, the war is over and everything is over and things are going back to normal and people are behaving like the world, nothing of that sort ever happened. And she's trying to forget too. She's trying to forget the horrors that she saw. She's trying to forget the things that are in her head. But it's not easy to forget any of that. It's not easy to forget what happened to you. It's not easy to forget something so traumatic that people like me who are reading about it like 80, 90, 100 years later are having trouble like even reading about it, and these people had to live through it. So this is what this story is about, and the reason why I'm so mad is because it's not presented properly to you in this text. So please, before you read the story, before you watch this video, even if you're finished watching this video, read up about the Holocaust, read up about the Second World War, and I'll discuss it with you when we have our video lecture. All right, I hope everybody understood what I had to say. I'm sorry if I'm too passionate, but I am very passionate about topics. Like I believe like knowledge should not be hidden. Anything that we should learn completely. And Holocaust is a dark part of our history, but it is a part of our history as well. This is what human beings are capable of when hate goes unchecked, when hate goes completely unbridled. This is what we can do to each other. All right, this is like the amount of cruelty we can visit upon each other. So just remember, whenever like you're reading online that, you know, in our country, like, oh, Muslims should be done, this should be done to the Muslims, or this should be done to the Sikhs, or this should be done to Pakistan. Just remember, it's not that far off from what Hitler did to these poor people. Whatever we are talking about, like whenever you say something like, oh my God, we can do this, these people are the reason that our country has problem. Once you start dehumanizing a people, once you start looking at a certain group of people as the problem, that's where the actual problem starts, because you're not treating them as somebody like you. You're not treating them as your equals. You're treating them as something different. So we should be aware of that because we have a charismatic leader in our country right now whose entire platform is built upon hate and this idea of one religion being superior to all religions. It's a very slippery slope, people. Just be careful about it. Like, be careful of the people around you. Like, you can see what's happening around you, right? Our entire country is like a powder keg at this moment. Like, billions of people are dying, everybody else, but there's still like a charismatic leader who everybody believes is infallible, who's believed to be like, oh, this paragon of virtue that he can do nothing wrong. He's just a human being, just like the rest of us, just like me, just like you. The only difference is he was elected into power and I wasn't. All right. So make sure like all this ideology and everything else that is being spread around in our country, that's why it's important for us to read about the things like the Holocaust, read about the things like what Joseph Stalin did or what Mao did. Because like whenever in history there is a charismatic leader, chances are he has the potential to do incredibly good things, but he also has the potential to do incredibly bad things because people rally behind a leader like that. People rally behind their hate. People are looking for somebody to be the enemy. People are looking for somebody to blame for their problems. And once you let the ball go, once you let like the dams open, like the amount of cruelties human beings can visit upon each other just boggles the mind. It just boggles the imagination. Like it's unimaginable, like the amount of cruelties we can do to each other. So I hope I hope this explanation was clear enough to you. I hope I have opened your minds up to I hope I've opened your minds up to certain concepts. I hope I've given you an introduction to like a darker part of our history, but which is still very important for us to know about. So thank you for watching, and I'll put forth some more information at the end of this video and resources where you can read more about the Holocaust and like what happened and everything else. So thank you.